So a few years back, Ashley and I, we owned a 2008 Chrysler Town & Country. I've told a few different stories about this experience before. Maybe even have shared this one, but kind of from a different angle today is where we're going to look at this. But this 2008 Chrysler Town & Country developed this little issue that became really super annoying and somewhat concerning, especially for Ashley being pregnant and having kids in tow. And what the issue was is randomly and without notice, this minivan would fail to start. Just nothing. No turnover, nothing whatsoever. When the key was placed in the ignition, there were no lights, no engine. There was absolutely no response from the vehicle. And what would happen is Ashley would call me, and I would call the guys at DC Dynamics, and they would bring the tow truck, and they'd pick up the van. This series of events happened probably, I will say, no less than 6 times.
Wow.
In a short period of time. Probably 2 to 3 months. So as you can imagine, this was super frustrating. What made it even more frustrating was that every time the van made it back to DC Dynamics, Derek or Chris from DC Dynamics would call and share something like this with me. Jake, you have no idea what's going on. But once we get the van off the tow truck, in the parking lot, it starts right away, every single time. So we go back, we pick up the van, and each time, our faith was increasingly lower in this minivan and its ability to start. And I believe even Ashley developed what I call the red minivan PTSD. Because every time she put the key in the ignition, she'd hold her breath, wondering if the vehicle would actually turn over. And more times than not, it actually did start. Far more times than it didn't, it started. But each time that it didn't start, one of us would exclaim, "See, this van is a piece of junk. We knew there was something wrong." Our van faith was in an all-time low, and it was time for a change. So, we started our shopping experience, and on one particular Saturday of van shopping, we found ourselves in Appleton, looking at lot after lot for the right replacement. After 4 hours of shopping, we found nothing. Nothing that we could agree on, at least. Carter was growing anxious, ready to go home, and we sat at Les Stump Ford in Appleton. It was time to go. I put the key in the ignition, and there was zero response from the van. After we had just getting done telling these guys, "Yeah, it's a great runner." So here we are in the parking lot, facing yet another tow truck charge to DC Dynamics in Oshkosh. I walked into the showroom to see if any of the sales guys could help. 2 guys, they came out and they started to try to figure out what was going on. One of the guys went in to grab this machine, and he rolled it out, and it was a battery jumping station. And he was going to try to jump our battery. And he asked me to pop the hood, so I popped the hood. And he's just about to clamp the clamps on the battery, and this old guy, one of the old sales guys, comes barreling out of the front door. Hold on, get out of my way. I know what's going on. So I want you to get an accurate picture of this guy, okay? Here's what I saw. He had on a pair of perfectly pressed dress pants, a white short sleeve button-up dress shirt, and a thin black tie. His hair was high and tight, and it was the flattest flat top that I had ever seen. This guy just oozed military, probably Marine. And sure enough, there it was on his forearm, the gold and the eagle emblem, and the word Semper Fi written underneath. and he began to instruct me. He said, "Son, get in the driver's seat. Put your left leg on the ground and rock this van forward and backward like a couple high schoolers in love." So I obliged and proceeded with the rocking. Then he said, "Now turn her over." I turned the key, and voila, the van started right there. Welcome to your sermon today, full of faith. Talk about being full of faith, right? This Marine turned car salesman had a great amount of faith in his ability to help us get this van started. He shared that he had plenty of experience on this particular problem, especially with this Chrysler Town & Country in the year range of 2018 to 2012, or 2008 to 2012. He learned on a message board online of a switch short in this specific vehicle. And what he ended up doing was coming up with a solution to the problem all by himself. It's a practical example for all of us at applying both experience and understanding in an area in order to be bold in your faith. His display of faith in knowing and fixing the issue ended up growing our faith. Because from that day forward, when the van wouldn't start, we would just put our left leg on the ground. We'd rock the van back and forth like a couple high schoolers in love. And it started every single time. When you think about the doers of the Bible, or even doers in your own life, I imagine one of the traits that you see in all of these people is their level of faith in general, or maybe even their level of faith in a specific area. So think about your own life. Is there an area where you are full of faith? How are you doing at sharing that faith with somebody else in order to replicate into them and in turn help grow their faith? This is actually one of the ways that you can intentionally share the wealth, which is our summer objective, right? And be a doer at the same time. It's like the two birds with one stone thing, right? Today, our objective in this sermon is to understand even more what it means to be full of faith in an area and how this helps bring about being a doer of the things. And that causes others' faith to grow. The Bible story that we're going to focus in on today comes from Judges chapter 4. And actually, it's a story that Pastor Joel recently taught me, and I want to share and teach it to you today. And really, I love what Pastor Brett did last week, because I want to tell you the story in my own words, and I want to encourage you to read it this next week. But I want you to be able to sit and listen and hear this story from my own words. We're going to take this from Judges chapter 4, and here are just the first few verses to kind of give you a setup. The children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord when Ehud was dead. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, that reigned in Hazor, the captain of whose host was Sisera, which dealt with Harosheth of the Gentiles. And the children of Israel cried unto the Lord, for he had 900 chariots of iron. 20 years he mightily oppressed the children of Israel. Our friends over at Music of Life Church this year, they are focusing in on the year of fierceness. Okay? Fierceness is simply defined as undiluted tension. Really what this is just a lot of tension. Both quality and quantity. Tons of tension. And something that they're learning is that they face this fierceness, when they face this fierceness with boldness, what it will equate to is a level of transformation in themselves. For us in your life, we are on this climb, right? Each week, maybe even each day, we are faced with tough situations, fierce situations. And our option is to choose a path of life or choose a path of death. Choosing a path of life is a bold move because the path of life is a hard path. Verse 3 said that the king, Jabin, mightily oppressed the children of Israel. They were under this fierce oppression. But just before those words, it's recorded that finally, what happens? Israel cries out to the Lord. They had gotten to the low point where the oppression was too much, and finally, they turn their attention to the Lord and they cry out for help. This oppression and captivity that Israel was experiencing was because Jehovah sold them over, right? Giving them up was a just response because they weren't focusing on Jehovah. They weren't focusing on doing the paths of life. They were focusing on comfort, which are paths of death. And what ended up happening, we know this, right? If we look all through Judges, years and years and years, this pattern continues where Israel would experience these waves of this oppression and this bondage, and then they cry out, and then there would be deliverance. This pattern continued all because they kept going back to the path of death. This pattern of choosing comfort instead of growth, the hard thing. And so then right at verse 4, we get introduced to Deborah, the doer. Deborah, the doer, was full of faith. It says in verse 4, Deborah was a prophetess. And she also judged Israel at this time. Not only is Deborah a judge, but she's also a prophetess, someone who can intentionally get a word from God and share it for the benefit of the hearer. One of the areas I believe Deborah was full of faith in was her calling by God as a prophetess. Now, as a judge and as a prophetess, Deborah is responsible for sitting in the seat of Moses to judge all of Israel, to hear the tough cases, to make her judgment on all these things. What Deborah's doing here is Deborah's being the leader for all of Israel with these areas of influence that Jehovah has called her to occupy. Verse 6 says that Deborah sent out and called out for Barak. Barak is the military commander. Now, the context for all of us here is that Israel is still at war with Canaan. And Deborah calls Barak and she asks him this: Has not the Lord God of Israel commanded you to take 10,000 men into battle? Isn't that the message that God spoke to you, Barak? Remember, what have we said about doers? Doers are about doing the actions, especially the actions that God is telling them to do. Deborah knows full well Barak has heard a command from the Lord, but is not doing anything about it. Is Barak a don'ter? Yeah, he is. But it's through this confrontation that Deborah is giving Barak an opportunity to get on the path of being a doer, the path of life, and then doing the thing that Jehovah has commanded. Now, I want to point something out to all of us, because it's something that we just learned just now about doers. Doers are willing to confront don'ters in order to help them get on the path of being a doer.
Ooh, nice.
And Barak responds and says to her, well, if you're going to go, then I'll go. But if you don't go, then I'm not going to go. Who did God give the command to? Barak, the leader of the army. And he's giving her an ultimatum. what's happening here is Barak really is putting the responsibility of this really big decision on Deborah's shoulders. This woman who's leading this nation. And what she says to him is interesting. She said, I'll go with you. I'll go on this journey. But listen, there's going to be a woman who gets all the honor for this. We're going to try to find Sisera, the leader of the Canaanite army. And we're going to try to kill him. But you're not going to get the honor. You're not going to get the credit. This is a warning that Deborah issues to Barak. This warning that he would not get the honor, that it would actually be a woman that gets the honor. This is a move of full faith by Deborah. And what happens in response to Deborah's statement of faith? Barak puts his faith in Deborah. And they both arose and they went down to Kadesh. Deborah, Barak, and the 10,000. Now their goal was to go and do the word of the Lord and wage war against Sisera and all the Canaanites. And what happens is the Canaanites see Deborah and Barak coming and the 10,000 coming, so they all begin to prepare for battle. And Deborah said to Barak, "Up, for this is the day in which the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hands. Is not the Lord gone out before you?" So Barak went down from the mount, and 10,000 men went after. And the Lord confused Sisera and all his chariots and all his hosts with the edge of the sword before Barak. So Sisera fell down off his chariot, and he fled away on his feet. But Barak pursued after the chariots and after the men of Sisera, and fell upon the sword, and there was not a single man left. However, Sisera fled away on his feet to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. So, Sisera gets away. He goes to hide in the camp of his allies. Jael went out to meet Sisera. Says to him, "Come in, my lord, turn in to me, fear not." For when he had turned into her into the tent, she covered him with a mantle. So Jael tells Sisera, come into my tent. And he does this. And what she does is she covers him with a thick rug. So let's get this picture, okay? He comes into the tent, and she goes, "Here, hide under the rug. They're not going to find you under the rug." So Sisera peeked his head out from underneath the rug, and he asks her for a drink of water. Well, she says, "Go back to hiding. I will go get you something to drink." She cracks open a bottle of milk, and she brings it back. Jael does more by opening a bottle of milk. He asks for water. She gives him milk, and then she covers him back up with the rug. He peeks his head out one more time and says, "Hey, would you guard the door?" And she goes, "Yeah, I'll guard the door. Go back under the rug. They won't find you." And what happens? He falls fast asleep, like a little baby with his warm milk. What does Jael do? Then Jael took a nail of the tent, and she took a hammer in her hand and walked softly unto him, and drove the nail into his temples and fastened it to the ground. Just like Deborah said, a woman would get the honor. And behold, Barak pursued Sisera. And Jael came out to meet him and said, "Come, and I will show you the man that you're looking for." When they came into her tent, behold, there Sisera was, laying dead with a nail in his temple. And then we look at the first 2 verses in Judges chapter 5. What ends up happening here? Then Deborah and Barak sang on that day, saying, for that the leaders took the lead in Israel, for that the people offered themselves willingly. Bless you, Jehovah. Deborah is a doer because she took the mantle of leadership, because she allowed God to flow through her. Deborah used the faith that she had, the faith that she was full of, to glorify God by doing the things that he said she should do. As a prophetess, how do you think Deborah grew her faith in this area, this ministry, this calling that God gave to her? Do you think because of this calling that she had some magical equation happen, some osmosis to infuse her one step of faith needed to allow God to flow through her? No, Deborah grew her faith just like all of us grow our faith. Experience and understanding. This is just one of the stories, but I'm sure Deborah has a ton of stories about how she gained the experience and understanding needed. Earlier in this message, I asked you these 2 questions. Is there an area of your life where you are full of faith? How are you doing at sharing that faith with others to replicate into them, to help them grow their faith? One of the areas that all of us ought to be growing our experience and understanding is by doing the very last cause that Jesus gave all of us. You remember what it was? The last assignment that Jesus gave all of us, Matthew 28, starting in verse 18, and Jesus came to them and spoke to them, saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. This is Jesus saying, all of the authority has been given. Take direction for me right now. If there's one thing that you're going to take direction from me in, it's this right here.
Right.
Go. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Lord and in the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all of the things that I've taught you. I'll be with you always, even unto the end of the world. Church, who did Jesus give this cause to? Believers. Jesus gave this cause to believers. Who is it, church, that doesn't want to do this assignment from Jesus? Don'ters.
Right.
Unbelievers.
Ooh.
I want to give you a life lesson this week that will help facilitate your purpose and progress of growing your faith and your ability to do this assignment from Jesus. This is an area we ought to be full of faith in, being able to go and do the assignment that Jesus gave us to do. So your doer's life lesson for this week is this. Share your 112 at least one time this week for the benefit of somebody else. Your 112 is your salvation story. 1 minute before you met Christ. 1 minute about meeting Christ. And 2 minutes about your life after meeting Christ. Chris is already set up to do the doer's life lesson this week. Primed and ready. You don't need a special spot in a service to be able to do this life lesson. Your Don'ters life lesson this week. Put all of your energy into avoiding this life lesson that is set up to help you do Jesus' assignment. You might be saying, Pastor Jake, if I don't do this, are you calling me an unbeliever? What do you call yourself? Let's pray.